Hey everyone, this is Carbonite, and bring you another deck profile. This time we're going to be taking a look at one of the new decks from Set 9, Dragontree. And this variant that we're going to be taking a look at today is the Stoicheia variant. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so getting started, for those of you who are not familiar with Dragontree yet, when you play this deck, you actually have to choose 5 cards to be your ride deck. In this case, we do have these 5 cards, and we're going to start off by taking a look at our grade 0. So as you can see the text up there, you have a total of 5 cards in your ride deck made up of this card, 3 calamity cards, and an over trigger. So continuous Vanguard, this card gets plus 10 or plus 10k, plus 2k for each calamity card with a different card name in your soul. So at the beginning of your main phase, you choose a calamity card from your ride deck, you put into your soul, and then cost, if you have 3 calamity cards in your soul, you can put them into the ride deck face up, and then you search your hand or deck for 1 Dragontree of Ecliptic Dissemination Grifolia and write it as stand. If you search the card, you shuffle your deck. If you wrote a card, you choose 2 of your rear guards and you put a Dragontree marker. So we're going to be getting into what a Dragontree marker is in a little bit, but just know that you basically have your 5 cards in ride deck. The only thing you need for these is that they're calamity cards and that they all have different names. So there's grade 1, 2, and 3. You can either choose to play the ones from BT9 or the ones from, I believe it's BT6. They're just different art. They're the exact same name, but I guess we can go over their names and their skills. So this one, grade 1, is the start of the end. They all have the same skill where you play it with Counterblast 1 and you search your deck for up to 1 calamity card, reveal it, add it to your hand, which obviously we're not playing any in the main deck, so it doesn't really matter, that effect. The second is called Mystical Metamorphosis, and the third one is called Looming Demise. So none of that really matters. And then of course your 5th card is going to be your over trigger. So now with Dragontree, you actually do get to choose which nation you want to play, and you get to play either that nation's over trigger, or you can just play the generic over trigger, but honestly you might as well just play the nation over trigger. So in this case we're obviously playing Blessed Favor, Stoicheia's over trigger. So basically how this works is you basically stand up and then you skip your ride phase, you go main phase, put a calamity card from ride deck to soul, next turn another one into soul, and then you do your 3rd one, and then once you put your 3rd one, you banish all of the cards, the calamity cards from your hand. They return to the ride deck face up, where they are used for something that we'll be talking about next. Alright, so doing something I never thought I'd say in a deck profile, starting off with the grade 10s. This is the only grade 10 in the game, Dragontree of Ecliptic Dissemination Grifolia. So this is the card that you will be using as your main Vanguard, as opposed to having it in your ride deck, because you can only have grades 1 through 3 in your ride deck. You just basically ride it from deck using the Griffo Seed. So let's go over his skill. So during your turn, he gets an extra 5k for every Dragontree marker on your rearguard circle. Then if you have 3 or more Dragontree markers, it gets an extra critical. And then of course, once per turn, when this unit attacks a Vanguard, you choose a face-up calamity card from your ride deck and remove it. If you did not remove a card, you choose an over trigger from your ride deck, reveal it, activate all of its trigger and additional effects, remove it, and stand all of your rear guards with a Dragontree marker. So obviously we're playing this card at 4 copies because 1, you actually do need to ride it from deck, so you do not want to risk damage checking your copy, and obviously you do have Persona Ride in this deck, so that means that you can you obviously want to be playing Persona Ride because this is a very slow deck, in case you couldn't tell. Basically what you have to do is after you've put in your 3rd calamity into the soul, all 3 go to the ride deck. You superior ride this from the deck, and then every single time you swing, you banish one of the calamities. So you have to survive 1 turn, 2 turns, and 3 full turns, basically 6 or 5 turns because you have to put one of these into soul. That's 2 turns, and then your 5th turn is when you can actually do things. So on turn 6 is when you have all 3 of your calamity cards removed from the game. You have your 1 card in the ride deck, so when you swing a Gorflia, since you can't remove a calamity card, you do actually just activate over trigger, which also means that you don't have an over trigger in deck, so you cannot rely on it to basically save you a turn, which is kind of unfortunate, but you know, this is the big boss of Wildress, so that's how it is. All right, and I guess we can also talk a little bit about the Dragontree markers, since we did mention them. So this is a Dragontree marker. They're actually kind of expensive because they have terrible pull rates, but all the Dragontree marker does is during your turn, if you have a card or a Vanguard with either Dragontree or Masks in its card name, all the units on the circle get an extra 5k. So it's basically half a force, but it only works if you're playing either Dragontree or the Masks, which obviously have not yet released, and we won't be getting until set 10. All right, so let's go ahead and... All right, so next up, the grade 3s. We are actually only playing 3 grade 3s, obviously because we don't need one in the ride deck. For the grade 3s, I've elected to play some Shield Fisher Dragon. So now Shield Fisher Dragon just has one effect, whereas it's basically just it used to be called Restraint. So he basically has a restraint where if you called a rearguard only from your hand this turn, he can't actually attack, but he is an 18k base. So now normally that's not too good. There have been some builds that play this as your main Vanguard way back in like BT2 or BT3, but basically the reason we're playing this is because it is a very nice beater. So if you put it on a Dragontree marker, like so, it becomes a 23k attacker, which hits over a defensive, which is pretty good. And then if you're going to be boosting it with a 5k unit, that makes 28, which is a very nice magic number. So basically just playing it here to be a beater, only playing the 3 because it's really easy to proc, as we'll be getting into. It's really easy to make sure you call something not from hand, but at the same time, you are a very slow deck, and you need as much shield value in your hand as possible. So the fewer amount of cards with no shield value that you can play, the better time you're gonna have. All right, so getting into the grade 2s, just like the grade 3s, we are actually only playing 1 grade 2, which is going to be 4 copies of Shadow Cloak. So let's go ahead and go over its skill first. So when it's placed on rear from hand only, you search your deck for an order card and reveal it. If your drop doesn't have a card with the same card name as that card, you discard the reveal card. So basically what this card does is you mill 1 order from your deck, but you can only mill it if you don't already have another copy of that same named order in your drop zone. So basically Shadow Cloak is here just to be our secondary attacker, as well as just being there to thin out the deck, because you are technically playing with a 45 card deck. You draw your first 4 cards, so you're playing with a 40 card deck for most of the game. So milling it out, just getting rid of a lot of blank checks, makes it a lot easier to hit triggers than a normal overdressed deck would be able to. So that's basically why we're playing. It does have this other skill where if you play an order, you can Soul Blast 1 and gives it 5k, which is probably not very good because you don't really have a lot of soul in the deck. And then if it's Alchemy Magic, you got to return one of your rearguards to the hand. But obviously we don't have any way to Alchemy Magic, so that second skill is essentially useless. So Shadow Cloak is just basically here to mill the deck thin, and to be a bit of an attacker. All right, so getting into the grade 1s, where our main bulk of deck playing comes from. We can start off with the Stoicheia Dragontree, which is this Dragontree Wrench, Bist Ayativas, whatever. So basically every single nation has one of these where they have the same first skill and a different second skill. So the first skill for this unit is when it's placed on a rear guard, it doesn't need to be from hand, but from anywhere. You can counterblast 1, you choose one of your rear guards without, or your rear guard circles without any Dragontree markers, and you put a Dragontree marker. So this is your main other method of getting Dragontree markers. You get 2 from riding into your Dragontree, and then you obviously want to be able to draw into one of these to call that third marker. And once you get that third marker, your Vanguard, your Dragontree is going to be swinging with an extra critical, which makes it a huge pressure on your opponent to actually guard, because if you hit a crit, that's 3 damage, and a lot of times they'll be at 2 or 3, so they can't really risk it that well. So they're gonna have to basically just PG or try and desperately hard guard, because remember, whatever, I'm just gonna call it Dragontree, does get power for each Dragontree marker. So when it swings after using this, that's 28 with an extra critical, and usually it'll be even more than that. So definitely, you kind of want a hard mulligan for this card because it's very important for the deck. And then that second skill, which is an act once per turn, then if your Vanguard is Great Thoroughbred, you can Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, choose a normal aura from your drop, and put it into your hand. So now that second skill is a little bit of a hefty cost. Now we do obviously play orders, and we can obviously mill them with Shadow Cloak. So if you really need an order, you can just, and you have both these cards, you can go Shadow Cloak, mill it, call this, Counterblast, Soul Blast 1, add that order that you just milled back to your hand, and then you can instantly use it, which is the main versatility that this card has. So basically, pretty good card. An overall really good card, very vital to the strategy. All right, so next up we have another card from set 9, arguably one of the best cards from set 9. That is going to be the 4 copies of Burrow Mushroom. So now this has a skill where you can put it into the soul and call 2 plant tokens to rearguard. Then if you have a grade 3 Vanguard with Ranfia, you get to give one of your rearguards an extra 5k. So now obviously we're not doing it for that second skill because our Vanguard is very far away from being a Ranfia. We're mainly just using that skill, the first skill. It basically just gives us a free soul, and we do actually get an extra couple of attackers. So meaning that our shield fishers that were swinging for 23, now they're swinging for 28. Your Vanguard that's swinging for 23 on the first turn, now swinging also for 28. And even if you just have this as your rear guard, you call a plant token in front of it, that's 13, 18 on the Dragontree marker. So definitely very good, serving dual purpose, basically giving you free rear guards as well as building up soul, because in this deck you actually don't have a lot of soul because you banish your entire ride, basically your ride deck back to the ride deck. So you go into your grade 10 having 1 soul, and most of the time you want to use that soul to either get this guy out or just call this guy from hand, giving you an extra 2 tokens and giving you that extra soul, which is the most important part. All right, so moving on to our order cards. We are actually playing only 2 different order cards. The first is going to be in the Dim Darkness, the Frozen Resentment, which is basically like a Spiritual Body Condensation. You play it with Soul Blast 1. You check the top 3 cards of your deck. You choose 1 card from among them. You discard it. Then you choose a card from your drop with a grade less than or equal to your Vanguard and call it to rearguard. So now the reason we're playing this over the Spiritual Body Condensation, there's 2 really big reasons. The first is the mushrooms. The mushroom is basically your best call target off this, that or the grade 1. These are the main 2 targets you're calling off of it. But the main reason is you Soul Blast. You basically put this in, you make your 2 tokens, and then you Soul Blast it out, call it back out, maybe use a skill again. And of course, since our main reborn target is the mushrooms, Spiritual Body Condensation only gives it an extra 5k. And if we're going to be putting it into the soul anyway, we're losing out on that extra power that we'd have gotten from that. And this card also serves the dual purpose of where you're actually filtering your deck a little bit, making it that much easier to actually hit those triggers. Basically the same logic as we talked about with Shadow Cloak, where you already have a small deck or a smaller than average deck, and by filtering it out, you make it that much easier to hit triggers, which not only pressure damage, but they also make it easier to guard. All right, and so for our other order, we are actually playing only 3 copies of this card, which is called Sweets That Become an Evil Dream. So this skill is you play with Counterblast 1, you draw a card, look at the top card of your deck, and then you put it on the top of your deck, or you discard it. So now you could be playing a lot of different order cards in this place. You could be playing things like the Triple Drive. Personally, I don't really think it's that good, actually. It's funny if you want to play it. All the all the goodwill towards you. But I think this is personally just a little bit better. The counterblast cost does hurt a little bit because you're already using one counterblast on your Dragontree wrench. And then if you want to use a skill again, you want to counterblast again, and soul blast and add another one. So this is another counterblast that just stacks on top of it. But in general, in this deck, you are running pretty low on resources. But this card just is... There's basically two reasons why this is in. First, it's a differently named order card, so you can double Shadow Cloak. And second, it basically just stacks your deck. It's a 1-for-1 because you get to draw a card, and then you look at the top of your card of your deck. If it's a trigger, you leave it there. If it's not, you throw it away into the drop zone. So you either filter or you stack your deck. So pretty decent in that respect. Just playing it at 3 because you don't want to have too many orders. As I said at the beginning, you want cards with shield value because your first turn is very weak. I don't think I mentioned this, but you actually can't play this order card until you ride into your grade 10 because at that point, your Vanguard is grade 0 and you can't even call grade 1 rear guards. So you basically just have to swing and pass. Alright, so just finishing up, we do actually just have the 4 PGs. You actually can't play Elementario in this deck because Elementario needs your Vanguard to be grade 3 or less. And your Vanguard is grade 10, which is very much not grade 3 or less. Alright, so getting up into the trigger lineup, we are playing the 4 front triggers. Mostly playing the front triggers because it is a 20k shield, and most of the time you can just swing with Vanguard first because it is hitting pressure, and a lot of your swings are going to be hitting over defensives. Opting to play actually 4 criticals, mostly just because for the shield value, because you can play a lot of draws just to see your pieces a little bit better, but I don't like draws because they are only 5k shields. But speaking of draws, since we do have to play some, because we do actually want a little bit of draw power, we are playing 3 copies of the draw trigger, which is at least a 10k shield, so it makes up for it a little bit. And then of course for the last couple cards, we do have the heal triggers because obviously we want to be able to heal down, and it is also a 15k shield, which is pretty good. On the note of the heals, you could theoretically play the new heals from BT9 because they are going to be live pretty much until you ride into grade 10 because you're always going to be at grade 0 and you're always going to have a lower grade than your opponent. But those are only for the early game, and I find the early game to not really be that much of a struggle. If you go first and if you go second, it is a little bit more of a struggle. So if you would like, you can always play around with the heal ratios, but my recommendation would be the new counter heals from set 9. Alright, so I figured we'd finish off with just a quick test hand, as well as just kind of showing you what your early turns look like, and just kind of telling you how to play the deck. So we have a starting hand. We've got Shadow Cloak, we've got our wrench, we've got a front trigger, and we've got a heal trigger. So now there is a debate to be said about putting your heal trigger back because obviously you want to be able to heal. But in this case, I think I might want to actually keep everything in hand because the Shadow Cloaks with 2, we can instantly mill out both of our orders. And if we combine it with the wrench, we actually will be able to fetch it back. And basically what you're doing with your first hand in this deck is you want to keep as much shield value in your hand as possible, even if that means drawing into multiple triggers and keeping multiple triggers, because your hardest part with this deck is the early game. So getting past that early game is your biggest hurdle, and obviously the next hurdle is surviving the next 3 turns after you ride into grade 10. So we're going to go ahead and keep this hand and just see what happens. So obviously we're going to be standing up our Vanguard. We draw for turn. Unfortunately, it is a order card, which means it is no shield value, but you know, it is what it is. So obviously we're not going to discard for ride deck because instead of doing that at the start of our main phase, we actually choose a Calamity from our ride deck and we put it into the soul. So now since we have 1 Calamity in there, we're getting extra plus 2k, so it is a 6, or we are on an 8k base, just like if we were riding into grade 1. So let's say they swing at us, probably don't want to be taking early damage because the early attacks are the easiest ones to guard. So we guard 15, that's an over trigger to pass. Take no damage, move into our next turn, draw for turn. Unfortunately, another Shield Fisher, which is a card that is also not a shield value. So we are going to be having to bank a little bit on defensives during our next turn. So obviously we're going to skip ride phase, go into main phase, put a Calamity card from our ride deck into the soul. Now that we have 2, we're getting plus 4,000, which means we are at 10, just like if we were at grade 2. We're going to swing with the 10, check the drive. PG, pretty good in case things get very dicey during the next turn. But thankfully we are at 0, so we don't really have to worry about that. And at this point is where we really want to start taking damage, because we have the wrench and we want to be able to counterblast with it. So let's say we take damage, we lose one of the orders, take another damage, a Shadow Cloak. That's perfectly fine. So going into our next turn, we stand and draw. Obviously, once again, we don't have to discard full ride deck because we are not riding. But in this case, we'll put our last Calamity card into soul. And now since we have 3 Calamity cards into soul, we can pay the cost of putting 3 Calamity cards that were in the ride deck back into the ride deck face up, and then searching our deck for one Dragontree and Superior Ride It. So we ride out our Dragontree, and since we did fulfill the conditions of Griffo Seed, we do actually get 2 Dragontree markers, which most of the times you're just going to put in the front row because that is the place where they are going to be the most useful. So following that up, we are obviously going to be calling out our 2 Shadow Cloaks now that we can actually play things from hand. Obviously, I didn't play anything during those last turns because I was at grade 0, and the only cards you can call when you're at grade 0 are grade 0s. I'm going to be calling the 2 Shadow Cloaks, milling the 2 copies of our order card, the Sweet Dreams, and the, what's this thing called? In the Dim Darkness. Basically just milling our 2 copies of the orders to the drop zone. Basically what's happening here is Shadow Cloak is revealing this. Since there's not a copy of it in the drop zone, we put it into the drop zone. This one is revealing this. Since there's not a copy of it in the drop zone, we put it into the drop zone. So now we would probably call out our wrench and then use its skill to counterblast 1 and call out another Dragontree marker. So now where you would put this kind of depends. Right now I don't have anything else that I want to be putting behind Shadow Cloak, so I'm going to actually put it with my wrench. So this is now hitting for 1828, which is a really good number because both of these are getting an extra 5k thanks to the markers. Next up, I always want to be playing an order card every single turn. This is a little bit risky because as you can see, we only have 1 card in soul. So really what we're hoping off these top 3 is to hit a mushroom so that we can call it and recur our soul. So playing that card, we soul blast the 1, check the top 3 cards of the deck. Nice, we hit the mushroom. So the other option we could go for is this, because we would actually be able to get a 4th Dragontree marker. But I think especially since I don't have Persona Ride, I want to be milling the mushroom just so that I can sustain some soul during the next turn and actually use the wrench's 2nd skill to actually add back an order card. So obviously we're going to be milling the mushroom and then call back out the mushroom. And then we slide into soul. Now we have a soul for next turn, whether we want to use it on the wrench or when we want to use it on the other unit or our 2nd copy of this order. Call up the 2 plant tokens. We now have a full board. Of course, our hand is a little bit worse for wear, but we have a full board and 3 Dragontree markers. So we'll be swinging +5, +5, +5, +5. That makes 33 with 8 extra critical. Check the drive 1, draw trigger, just put it wherever, and then 2nd check and nothing. So we would swing at the Vanguard, and then we swing whatever this is, and then whatever this is, which is 20, Dragontree plus 5k, 15 plus 5k is 15. If we add the trigger, that'd be 30. Oh, one more thing that you have to remember not to forget. Whenever you swing at the Vanguard with your Dragontree, you actually remove one of your Calamity Ride deck cards from the game. So basically you go 3 turns, you swing, you remove 1 every single turn, and then if you have all 3 removed and you swing again, you activate your over trigger. Alright, so that's going to do it for my deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to do all those YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.